Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Lentini, your host for the podcast Different Thinking for Different Times. And with me, I have Thomas Moore. He likes Tom. And I met Tom a couple of months ago at a client of mine. And the client said to me, I want you to meet this guy, Tom Moore. He shares a lot of the thoughts that you have, Steve, about not paying attention to what I call here. Let me find the acorn brain, the small-minded thinker, that voice that Rainier Maria Rilke called in the 1800s the little hooligan. And Rainier used to say, "Will you let the little hooligan run you, or will you run it?" So Tom and I were talking, and he had studied Gurdjieff and Ouspensky and a lot of the thinkers that I had studied, especially in the research for the book Sage Advice. And I wanted everybody to hear the wisdom of someone who and how they came to realizing they could really change their life by expanding their thinking. And so from there, Tom, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I'll ask you some more questions.
I was born in New Hampshire in Laconia, and around the time I was three, my dad was in the military. We got stationed in Colorado, so we moved out there. And then by the time I was a teenager, I was kind of relocated back here to finish high school with some family members. My family stayed there; they're still there currently. Um, and I made my life here in New Hampshire, and Um, I would I would describe it as a zigzag line. Um, I've got a couple kids. I've been married twice. I guess some of that, in particular, being married twice. I think after the second divorce, I was kind of like, okay, there's only one variable that stayed the same in each one of those equations, and it was me. So I don't know if I at that point necessarily made the concerted effort to say, what is it, but that's kind of what happened. So it started first on the aesthetic level, I guess, with books like Own the Day, Own Your Life. It's by Aubrey Marcus. It's a great book, but it more or less kind of stays on the surface, like how you can do different things in your day, physical things to make your day better. And that's probably the true start of it. I didn't have any necessarily any intentions of ending up or going the direction it did. It was kind of just one author led to the next. My interests led to next. I had setbacks. I I battled alcoholism most of my adult life, and had a good run of being sober on my own, and then it's now a year and a half ago. It had gotten to the point, it had came back slow, and then got to the point where I was using it again the same way that I would have earlier in life, and just there's more life that was had, so there's more of just the life stuff, which alcohol, any what I've realized, alcohol is a good scapegoat for me, but really, what I've realized is compulsion, because I can go with the same, and I do right now. It's books. It's most of any of my free time, and some of the time that isn't necessarily free, I consume with reading. So I know what it's shifted to. I'm aware of it. I'm definitely I'm better equipped to understand it. But so yeah, I mean I I did it on my own. I guess what I was getting to is a year and a half. I went and sat down in some meetings, and the more and more different areas that I learn about, whether it's um, Greek philosophy, modern day philosophy, the metaphysical stuff, like, Gurdjieff and Ouspensky and Hinduism, yogic tradition, things like that, they all have threads that overlap. I mean, sometimes the words are almost the same, but the message to me is always the same. Always.
And what was that message?
Um, that we're much bigger than most of us take the time, the effort, the patience to understand. Like, we believe that we're our age, our profession, our connections to others, which on some level that's true, but not the one I'm referencing. Meaning, like, special relationships or things that that feed our ego. Um, and it's that thing that even modern philosophy can get really, to me it gets kind of convoluted in terms of basically our pure essence, the thing that truly connects us, and that's us as a species. That's really, in my assessment, from what I think I understand, is everything. I mean, it's easier for me to mentally make that connection with living things, but it really is everything we see, feel, touch, um, and I don't know, like, the more and more I explore it, the more and more that area of my mind becomes a safe place. You know, not that long ago, it was a terrifying place to spend much time in. So,
Gurdjieff said that when people start to wake up, when they first get that shock, and whether it's another person or life events or a major health challenge, but whatever it is, he said the first, what he called it was, they realized the terror of the situation.
yeah,
And that's coming to grips with who they really are. And most people hide from it.
yeah, yeah.
And
It's
that's where a lot of the addictions come in, and whether it's sex or whether it's drugs or alcohol or TV or, like you said,
yeah,
some compulsion. It's to cover up and patch over the terror of the situation. And what he says, and what he said, and Ouspensky said the similar things, is to embrace all the flaws, to get to that place where we can laugh at ourselves and still love ourselves, flaws and all, unconditionally.
yeah, yeah. It's, to me, I don't know if it's a simpler way of looking at it, but for me it is. It's kind of like this. It's the same saying as, how can you expect to give something that you don't possess? So a lot of times that's in reference to love or things like that. But really, if you can't be comfortable in your own company,
Yeah,
how can you truly be present and comfortable in others'
yeah,
company?
yeah,
Maybe for burst, but not,
yeah,
not for an extended period of time.
yeah. Brief bursts, yeah, which I think most people experience because so many believe their thinking, and believing our thinking is fine. That's okay to a degree. What happens is, um, I call it the acorn brain or the small-minded thinker. That aspect of it. Many people have other names for it, but whatever they name the voice is fine.
Yeah,
The thing is that as they believe it, that there's no one, to your point, that questions their answers, because they won't. If they're believing their thinking, they're going
yeah,
to go gather evidence to prove that's true, despite any evidence to the contrary. It's called confirmation bias, which that's a science term, right?
yeah,
Researchers check in to make sure they don't have confirmation bias, that they're open to opposing views and new data, et cetera, et cetera. But we saw confirmation bias take over science during COVID.
hmm,
People were not open to other points of views if it disagreed with the prevailing thought pattern. And that's what Gurdjieff talked about, to guard against and to decide that they were going to run the machine. He called it the machine.
Yeah.
Will you run the machine or will you let the machine run you?
Yeah.
And he had a whole body of work that when people came to his work, he would break them down with what he saw. But what he saw was the raw human being that they needed to embrace.
Right.
And what he also experienced is many people ran away from it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's right. Well, yeah. I think that's why, like you alluded to, um, if there isn't a great enough catalyst, we're gonna go to what feels easier. So it seems like, from what I can see, individuals that walk through that, it's because they know what they're going against, and I would think in their assessment is was worse. So whether it's a near death experience or just you know depression or just feeling like there's more. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard work. It's peeling back of layers. Like, and I haven't, I've talked a little bit about alcoholism in that group that helped me, and I've talked about the books and things that have helped me, and there's some other things that I've discovered too. But I've seen a counselor for a while now, and I realized early on in that relationship, because she's you just like any other profession, you can have people that care about what they're doing, and it's going to show in their work. You can have people that don't. So I had a bad experience years ago, and maybe part of it was what I brought to it as well. The second go around, I've connected with somebody who is passionate about what they're doing, and they care about me. And I know when she says something that gets my ire, like that I want to respond to immediately on the defensive, I usually sit with it now because I'm like, why'd I get spiked up like that? If that didn't have any, if she was way off base, it would have passed like a cloud in the sky.
Right.
But it doesn't. So that means to
Right.
me I got to sit with it. And generally, if I sit with it long enough, I can come back to her and go, you know what, you're right, and this is why. Um,
You just said something that I want to emphasize that is, I think, a good thing for people to hear is that it's nothing for us to really work on if it passes us by like a cloud in the sky.
mhm.
It's not really meant for that person if there's no reaction.
Right.
That's the thing. That's where the confirmation bias comes in, because when they hear something that they react to, the first thing they want to do is defend it, like you mentioned, and not take it in as, wait a minute, this is for me
Yeah. That
to work on. Yeah.
to to expand on that a little bit too. Generally, at least for me, and what I believe I understand,
Hmm.
what that voice is or that initial reaction, that's my ego trying to protect itself.
Hmm.
Our friend Steve that connected us,
Hmm.
he gave me a gift that I I can't measure it. I can't compare it to much in any of my other relationships. And for him, it was just a casual comment. Basically, we were talking about something that I was doing that had the potential to be of great value to other people. And
Hmm.
the first couple times I was involved in it, I was completely self-centered in that reaction. And I'm telling him how I was feeling about it, and we were supposed to be talking about work.
Hmm.
And this conversation went on for an hour, but he sat back and he said, Tom, is that because you expect to get some kind of big pat on the back for this thing that you're doing? I don't know if those were his exact words. That was basically the statement. And the same reaction happened inside. In a, I could feel it welling up, and I wanted to just be like, you're way out of line, blah, blah. But I was like, this guy cares about me. What he's saying, he's seeing something that I'm having trouble seeing. And he was right. And
Wow.
again, that one took me a little bit of time to come to also. And I did call him um, when I realized it and thanked him. But
Well, you just alluded to another thing that I want to emphasize is that he really cared about me. And those are the people, the real friends, the deep friends, will risk our wrath.
Hmm.
Not that the other friends aren't wonderful. They love us, and they just love us, and may not comment on anything they see because they love us that much, and they don't. It doesn't even occur to them that you need to hear that,
Right.
and maybe it does cross their radar a little bit, but they go, oh, that's just Tom, or that's just
Yeah.
Steve, right? That's just Lentini. That's just who they are. But I experienced the same thing back in my mid 40s, where I met a coach in a men's group who really got me going. I was ready to quit and leave,
Yeah.
and I just said, you know what? Wait a minute. There's something here for me to get. And then later on, when I was 48, I met a coach who I had for 20 years until she died. 21 years until she died. And the first time I met her, she gave me some feedback just like Z gave you.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I wanted to lash out at it, and I just sat with it, and I felt confronted by it. And then I was driving home, and I said, wait a minute here, imagine not knowing. And I use that with my clients today, when especially newer candidates that I'm coaching, and they first hear something that confronts them, and I'll ask them, how do you feel about it? And you want to tell me to go screw off, or what? What's going on? Because I could see the reaction, and they'll say, yeah, no, I got to sit with it. I don't know. I mean, do I really show up like that? Yes. And then I say, wait a minute, relax. Tell your brain, tell that acorn brain, imagine not knowing. Because if that woman hadn't woke me up, and the guy before her, I wouldn't have met her if that guy before her in the men's group didn't wake me up. If I didn't come to that conclusion, imagine not knowing, guess what? I'd still be walking around like that guy showed up 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I'd still be walking around like that. And I think about it today, and I'm just so grateful that they showed up.
Yeah.
And others had shown up earlier, to your point, that I disregarded. It was like, no.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I would think that two of those things have to, those examples kind of have to coincide with maturity.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I mean, I would say decade over decade, maybe even closer time span. I'm a different person. I mean, in reality, I'm a different person tomorrow, or even, but I
Yeah.
mean, something that is noticeable for myself. But that whole thing has to speak towards the splinter in the beam, or the speck in the log. What there's so many different ones, but
Right.
uh,
The sawdust, and I can see the sawdust in your eyes, but I can't see the log in my own.
yeah. And so we you know, I believe that it's tied to that whole false self that we create,
Yeah.
so that we can assuage some of our fears instead of facing them, and then they get so close you can't see them. So when there's an opportunity like that, especially from when it comes from a source that you know they genuinely care about you, it's like
Yeah.
it's the greatest. To me, it's the greatest thing a person can give another person.
Yeah. Well,
Because
to your point, I thought friends were always there to pat you on the back and puff you up, and
yeah,
and then I realized, yeah, they're fine. The ones that risked my wrath were really the true friends,
these are the ones you
because
want to keep around.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
harder to find them, but boy, they're jewels to hang on to, right? It's like kind of like mining for diamonds, harder to find them, but
yeah, and I think potentially too, if you are the one that responds defensively like that, those opportunities. I mean, they may continue to present themselves, but I would think a person who puts themselves out there in that way and then gets that, if I had just belched out what was happening inside me when Steve offered that information, he'd probably be like, Tom can't he can't handle, he doesn't understand the entirety of this relationship.
yeah,
Maybe.
that it was given in love.
Yeah. yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, luckily we had a, I believe we knew each other well enough, and those levels of trust were built prior to that.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm really grateful for it.
Well, and he's got people around him that will risk his wrath,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
right? Because we all need somebody that'll um, tell us what they see, because
Yeah.
they can see it. It's fascinating, right? How other
Yeah.
people. And I was walking around seeing other people's flaws, but I hadn't
Oh,
seen
yeah.
my own.
I, again, part of the journey that we're talking about, um, you start seeing those things like those little pearls and stuff that you collect. You, they seem to be more easily applied to others. And it goes right back to the whole saying. Um, but for me now, it's gotten to the point where I'm like, okay, if that was so easy for you to see, that there must be something inside of yourself that aligns almost perfectly with that. Because why would it be so on my radar? If I wasn't carrying it already, I can see it so easily in this person. It's either it's either a part of my past or something that's still there, or something that's big in there. So
Yeah.
I I don't think I've quite gotten to the point where I can take it immediately and go, okay, well that's
Well,
yours.
that's the mirror principle. I just bought the book, so I want to look at the name. It's been out of print since the '60s. Um, oh, here it is. It's outside. It was delivered today.
Oh wow,
Advice on the Presence of Awareness by Namkai Norbu.
horrible.
Namkai Norbu, and it's called The Mirror.
I feel like I've heard the author's last name. I don't
And
recognize the title
it's hard to find new ones. It's even gone up $20 since I bought it
though. Oh wow,
last week.
I can't wait to hear about it.
The Mirror, Advice on the Presence of Awareness. And yeah, I haven't read it yet, but I heard about it. I was listening to Russell Targ. He's a physicist who became he was actually, the NSA and the CIA used him for remote reading. But in his book, let me get the name of the book because I've got it on Audible. In his book, Russell Targ, it's in my library, Limitless Mind. He just doesn't do to talk about remote reading and psychics, but then he goes on to talk about a little about waking up and about the value of understanding that our triggers, what triggers us, is really an invitation. That would mean who and what
Yeah,
triggers us. Is that the gift in those is life actually urging us to take a deeper look at them, which is what you just said.
right. It's where the work is.
It's where the work is.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
personalities like that same thing that cranks you up. Like that's
I love that.
you want to try to lean in. I mean, you want to try to lean into it, or try to keep exposing yourself to it to draw to draw it out. I think, and you know,
Do you ask yourself a question like, why is this cranking me up? What do you
oh,
do?
there. Well, that's the thing. So like, I know I'm humbled because there'll be times like when I really start to feel like I'm getting it, and I can I can recite quotes and things like that, and then there's a personality that I'm currently dealing with and have been for a while now, and this person, even just in their presence, has a way of spiking me up, and I can feel it. Like I'm part of it too is being more cognizant to when you take that time, that focus has to go somewhere. So it goes into like, what's my body doing? How's my breathing? Um, and with this person, it's like I just want to get away, and
Mm.
I find myself smiling, and I don't know. I would imagine it looks really, really plastered up there, but I know I know that that's a great thing to know because it's right there for me when I'm like, okay, I'm feeling good. I'm gonna go see if I can apply some of these things. Um,
So, what would you recommend to people? I mean, this podcast isn't going to reach people that are totally asleep, that believe they're thinking, because they're not looking for this kind of thing. So there are people that have reached this podcast. I think it's 1,800 and something people at this point in time in 21 countries.
wow.
Um, they've reached it, right? I think it was Muhammad who said, "What reaches us was never meant to miss us, and what misses us was never meant to reach us."
Yeah,
And since I found that quote, I use that during the day. It's like, okay,
yeah,
this is meant for me. It reached me, then I've got to be with it and stay with it.
yeah,
Your point, right? Like you said, I got to stay with it.
yeah,
So lean into it. I love that you said lean into it. So um, um, when you think of people just coming to this podcast, and it
yeah,
really bothers them, this part of it, because I've been doing the different thinking for the beginning. I've been just talking about what my near death experience taught me, what I saw, how petty we are, and if we weren't so petty, right? If we all had a peek at what's next, we wouldn't be so petty. We wouldn't be
yeah,
so small minded. So I just talk about expanding our thinking, noticing the small minded thinking, and expanding into what models. I mean, after all, we live in a universe,
yeah,
right? We're a little freaking ball floating around, and we're probably smaller than this marble, by the way, probably, right? And
yeah,
yet we think we're so important to what you said, the ego, right? And that's the
yeah,
part. So there's
yeah.
people with an ego that have made this podcast that are listening to it, and they're still bothered by a lot of the message, but they're still coming. What
Right.
would you say to them?
Um, I mean, my whole life's been in construction trades. Working with my hands.
Yeah.
Some opportunities have expanded from that, but I like the analogy. The analogy that works good for me is building tools to put in your toolbox, and I've heard other people use it too. But for me,
I
it's
like.
like finding those tools. Like even if you can't get behind some of the mental constructs of it or the spaciousness of it, it's like
Yeah.
this. Continue to find tools that you can employ in those situations. Like when I reference the person that I can tell just being in their presence, I'm getting vibes I don't. I'm trying to get out of get my own vibes like that out of me, get away from them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so whatever they may be, I mean, I've got some that work for me that they don't necessarily going to work for everybody, but it's taken experimentation. So being open minded to different things. Um, a lot of times I've found when I'm writing something off quickly, it's again because it's threatening that false sense of self. And that's the voice that's coming up. That's the one that's going, this is this is weird. Um, you know, also too, like genders, our genders are culturally depending on where we are, I suppose. But I think some of them are probably just human when we're talking about gender. There's expectations that we have, and for males in particular, the way that we're culturally designed to be or expected to be limit us to some of this exploration.
That's true.
So that's a big one, I think, for somebody that might be interested in. And I really, like I said, the more and more that I look at different areas, like I said, the entirety of philosophy, as far back as 4,500 years before Jesus. I mean, to now in AA meetings and the message, the at the core the message is the same, and a lot of that stuff comes directly from fear. We have this fear of death because we don't understand. We don't. It's a complete unknown.
Yeah.
So that in a lot of these authors, at some point in their books, there's a chapter dedicated to to trying to answer the question why we're so fearful of it and what kind of life we can live when that isn't kind of always there looming. But
Yeah.
to not even go that deep, there are fears that are in us from conditioning that happened when we needed them, like when we really truly needed other people for our survival. I mean, we still do. We always will our whole life, but
Mhm.
I'm talking like literally just to get our food and our nurturing and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, you're right. We don't think we're getting it from other people because we go to the supermarket, but it's still somebody put the
yeah,
seeds in the ground, somebody grew the food, or they packaged it and shipped it and got it to the supermarket, but then people had to put it on the shelves and have a system to price it. And yeah, there's all kinds of people that we need them, but you're right, it's not as visible as when you had to go walk down a half a mile to go to the farmer.
or I'm talking even when we were infants or toddlers, and
Yeah,
we relied on our parents or our
yeah,
caregiver, whoever they
yeah.
might have been. Those imprinted things on us that aren't necessarily bad. They just may not be serving us as well without taking a closer look at it. Instead, we just again that becomes part of that structure that we built in the sand. And that's from Singer when he references the house. I don't. That's also an analogy to an older one, The Man in the Cave. I can't remember who did that one. I don't know if it was Nietzsche. But anyways,
It might have been. I don't know either, but I will look it up.
yeah, they're just both of those things are basically just to illustrate how shoddy our self-created images are,
Yeah,
and these things that we fight so hard to protect that aren't even they're not they're not necessarily real, at least not in
no,
the sense that we believe.
yeah. Well, um, Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning said early on in the book that you can't chase success.
Mm.
Success comes when we develop the inner person, when we are true and authentic to who we are, and we live according to our integrity and our conscience, then success appears because we're living in true integrity and, and true to our conscience about the message, the gift we came here with. Basically, everybody has some gift.
Yeah,
It's just that in Western society, if you're not up in lights,
yeah,
if you're not in a dais somewhere, then people think they have no value. But in everyday life, we can touch people's lives
yeah.
and
Well,
leave a mark on them that changes their life, like Steve did with that comment for
yeah,
you.
yeah. And Viktor Frankl, this psychologist who literally lost everything, and when he was thinking about his family that he lost because of the Holocaust, he's in a concentration camp. His thoughts were, "I'm glad they're not here to be enduring the same suffering that I have."
Yeah, yeah.
So
And he was still figuring out, and he noticed too those people that still had humanity within them. They were still concerned for others.
yeah,
Would share a half of what little bit of bread they got, or hey, did Joe eat today? I didn't see Joe. Where's Joe? Let's go find
yeah,
out what's happening to Joe. In the middle of a concentration camp, which, by the way, if you did care about someone else, the guard saw you, you were in trouble. But still, those people kept at a shred of humanity, and those were the people he noticed that survived. The ones that only cared about themselves and were immobilized by fear and doing whatever they could to, even if it was to climb over the back of somebody else to survive, he said
yeah,
most of them died.
yeah. And optimists, which I found interesting. So I, what's happened with me is developed a real interest in Stoicism. And I think if you don't go deep enough into Stoicism, what you get initially is just that they're completely closed off. And and actually, modern authors that talk about Stoicism reference people like Franco, um, and it's
Well,
because,
who were some of the Stoics?
well, the founder is Zeno,
Mm-hmm.
the way I understand it,
Mm-hmm.
and one of his early students was Epictetus.
Mm-hmm.
Epictetus taught Fronto, who was Marcus Aurelius's tutor. So,
Mm-hmm.
but it's made somewhat of a resurgence, probably to help with people that are on the same track as I'd like to believe I am. But it basically, kind of in a nutshell, it's like um, the person that's seeking, I guess, control over themselves, because it's truly all that we can,
I'm
is
really
interested in
grateful that you.
relinquishing their desires.
I'm grateful you came up with Marcus Aurelius because in 121 to 180, so that means he lived AD, right? 121 to
Yeah,
180.
yeah,
Here's some of his quotes because it's in my book, Sage
yeah,
Advice.
yeah. I did. I read it. It's a great
Here's
book.
one. This one fits with what we're talking about. You have power over your mind, not
Yes.
outside events.
Nothing.
Realize this and you will find strength.
Yeah, yeah. Those things read still. Oh, I forgot Seneca in that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Seneca. So Seneca was, well, he's another Stoic. I can't remember where he was the philosopher for Nero.
Mm-hmm.
That relationship ended poorly for him. But even when he was sentenced to suicide by Nero,
Mm-hmm.
and he was like, okay, it's time to do this, and all of his friends petitioned to have his life spared, and he was basically like, have we not practiced or decided to practice the theology of Stoicism? Have you guys lost this all because you don't like where I'm headed? It was kind of like, I don't know. I mean, these are kind of romanticized, but the gist of it is just that. Like, the only thing that we control is our reasoned choice. And again, when I reference fear and understanding fear, that's where that comes from. So, like, to assuage the fear, we want to feel like we have control of so many things that we don't. And a lot of times that is like, it's wasted effort.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of his quotes fit to what you described too. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Dwell on the beauty of life. Watch the stars and see yourself running with them.
Hmm.
Then he said, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be.
Be one.
Be,
Yeah.
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 Accept the things that which fate binds you and love the people with whom fate brings you together, but
Hmm.
do so with all your heart. That's very much like what reaches you was never meant to miss you, because it could be who reaches you was never meant to miss you, right?
Yeah. The beautiful thing about Marcus's writings is they were for himself. All these other philosophers were
He's
basically
talking to
making a
himself.
profession out of it, where
He's
he
talking
was
to
the
himself.
emperor of Rome. So
Right.
all he was doing in his journal was basically studying the entirety of his life how to stay true to his principles, his philosophy, while being the emperor of the most powerful empire at the time.
Let me see if it said that in his notes. No, it didn't say that. I didn't get that from his notes, but it's knowing that he was writing to himself. Listen to
Yeah.
this. Think of yourself as dead. You have
Hmm.
lived your life.
Yeah.
Now, take what's left and live it properly.
Yeah.
What doesn't transmit light creates its own darkness. What
Yeah.
doesn't transmit
Yeah.
light.
Yeah. That's why this stuff reads like it was written yesterday. Because nothing's changed. Like we've got all this great technology. The human behavior at its essence is exactly the same as it was when he was writing. And if you go back to 4,500 years before Jesus, it was the yogic tradition. I believe the yogic tradition to be the center of what we all consider religion now. And the only reason why I believe that is because how old it is, one, and two, if you read the principles of it, there's a part of it in every religion. Before it became what I believe to be kind of a business. I mean, a lot of
Well,
the
yeah. Oh, it definitely became that. Yeah. Well, and when I went from this to what's next, and I had no fear. It's interesting. Getting in the ambulance, even waiting for the ambulance, I was filled with gratitude. And as I reflect back, it was really a sense of the presence of the divine.
wow,
That that the space was created so that somehow I knew I could totally surrender. I never thought about what's next. I was just in every moment, waiting for the ambulance, with the EMTs, then in the emergency room, then with the doctor, and that went on for 100 days altogether, 60 straight, 40 out of the next 60, and 6 months out of work. And again, it's just what unfolded because I wasn't fighting it, and I was in awe of it. Really, I was in awe of it. I felt like it was every day was a different room in heaven, and there was different people coming that were gifts. And I think back on that because now back in my body and fully ensconced 21 years later, you know how many days I don't have those
yeah,
moments? I don't
right,
have those thoughts, right?
yeah,
Right. I get reminded of it every day because of that experience. But I can tell you, um, that's the toughest place to come to. Because Aurelia said too, is that embrace the injuries,
yeah,
right? Take
yeah,
no injury. But like you said, very much like lean into it. That word wasn't used back then, but that's what you're talking about.
yeah. It's the same thing with those, the negative mind loop, or the loop starts after the feeling comes, or vice versa. But if you yeah, if you take the time to lean into that feeling, it goes away a lot faster than if you fight it.
Yeah. Well, and today society is so ensconced in making others wrong, not so they can be right, right? And
Yeah,
that's what I tell people. Listen, if you catch yourself wanting to be right and making others wrong, that's a place to begin to investigate.
yeah,
Because now you're not questioning your answers, and you don't like that someone disagrees. And
yeah,
we see all kinds of evidence of that. Yeah.
yeah,
So, what would you encourage people to do about the idea of they could run the machine, they can overcome small-minded thinking? I call it waking up. That life. My first book after I got out of the hospital was "Wake Up, Jump Into Your Life," and I made it an analogy to lucid dreaming. That most people are asleep, and that
yeah,
came from the Gurdjieff studies and the Ouspensky
yeah,
study
yeah. And
yeah,
and
30
Red
years ago.
Hawk, because
They're
he was
asleep.
he's a pupil of Gurdjieff's. But yeah,
Gurdjieff. Mhm. Russell
um,
Tarr mentions Gurdjieff in Limitless Mind as well. Gurdjieff touched a lot of lives with that idea
yeah,
that you can run that thinker. But I'll tell you, half the people listening, and maybe more, still believe they're thinking, but they were brought here, right? What reaches them was never meant to miss them. So what would you say?
well, I mean, if like using Gurdjieff as an example, I mean, I read the book that he did, meetings with
Remarkable men.
remarkable men. So
Yeah,
that
I
kind
have
of
I have his books here.
yeah, that kind of showcases like the amount of time and geographical area that he and his group pursued, like this, the answers to these questions. So they were sitting with people. I know in that book he references one time they find this man who was living in squalor basically, and they have a meeting with him, and he's like got this ancient wisdom. Um, so like, you know, he's around in the 1800s, the end of the 1800s, and you know, if you're pursuing that stuff, you go there, you know, say from current times, but
Hmm.
all
Hmm.
of everything he's got came from something that predates him and predates the next author before that. And I think that's why these things, I'm starting to see how they overlap so much. But in terms of like direct, like one thing to say, I would say, yeah, find authors like that, find books like that, find coaches like that, find people that are, if you're not a reader, find people that have already done the reading that you can interact with. You know, obviously, if I would think if people are tuning into you know, podcasts like this one and others, that's specifically what I mean. If you can't, you know, that those things don't happen the way they did in ancient times in terms of like living with your guru or
It's true.
whoever it is. But
It's true. I
that,
don't
you
have
know, that
room.
is the
I
benefit
don't
of
have room here to invite anybody in.
you know, but we have, this is the boon of the technology, not helping to post this self-created image and embellish it, but actually
Hmm.
find people that can help you find who you really are. Because
Mm.
when you start even getting inklings of it, you start to realize you don't get wobbled by a lot of the things that you used to. And they're, for me, they've started really small. I can't help but use driving as one of the very first ones, because it was
Yeah.
so profound to me how something so, what seemed so simple, had such a big part of that understanding that, why am I competing at this with all these other people on the road? And then when you take a step back and you can actually see what I would consider to be that negative energy going down the road in front of you, because when you decide to get over in the slow lane, do the speed limit, just enjoy your ride, be present, like actually involved in driving, you can see when somebody goes ripping past you and what they suck into that. Because before you know it, it's three or four more vehicles, and they're all kind of, they all have that energy. Um,
Yeah, they're chasing each other and weaving in and out of traffic, and
yeah, so it makes a good tangible example of, wow, okay, so that's driving. We do that with our professions. We do that with our interactions with people, that we're competing to get our point in. We're over talking people. We're being bullies if we have, you know, a position of authority. If there's anybody that we can actually exert our power over. Um,
yeah, I
yeah,
love it. Traffic is a great analogy. I use it in my next book. It's with the editor now. It's called In Plain Sight. Learn to see what most people miss and embrace life as it is.
yeah,
And one of the chapters is not giving an inch. And I used this my own experience in traffic when I first came to New York City. Talk about learning something you didn't know about
oh
yourself.
yeah,
And I'm in traffic, and I notice how people are just not willing to let anybody in. They're not letting me. And then when I get the first opportunity to let somebody in, I'm not letting anybody in. And
yeah,
then it caught me. I realized, wait a minute. Two things. One was people were so willing not to give an inch that they would risk damage to their vehicle.
yeah, yeah,
And then I thought, where else am I doing this? Not willing to give an inch. And you just laid that out, right? If am I in a meeting like that where I
yeah,
want to shut somebody off and overtalk them because I'm not giving them an inch? And I use that in that whole example, what you just talked about in that chapter. And when we get to embracing life as it is, we get into the slow lane and enjoy the ride.
yeah.
And for people, that's, I think, a great piece of advice, that if they haven't started to notice in traffic where they're not willing to give an inch, they're not going to notice it at work. They're not going to notice it in their relationships. But that would be a place to begin for people that
Yeah.
that look at how they're bothered by simple things like traffic.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because the easiest way for people to start with something like this is to find a place that's natural, that really bothers them, and traffic is a good place.
Yeah. And on my commute on both ends, going there and coming back, there's an exit at the end of the exit, whether I'm going to work and getting to the end of my journey off the highway or coming the other way home. There's a light at the exit. And countless times, those same people are at the light when I get there. Except
Wow.
I don't, we're at the light at the same time, but I don't have that knot right here in my neck. Or like,
Right. Right.
just feeling uncomfortable. Like the next interaction I have with somebody who had no part of that is going to get, that negative energy.
Yeah. Yeah. If people could just get to notice, this would be the beginning of waking up to run the machine. Is just notice where they're not willing to give an inch, and start in traffic, and or look at the effects of those that aren't willing to give an inch, and then they get upset, and then they're weaving through traffic, risking their lives and the lives of others.
Right.
And that's a good place to start, I think.
And it's tough. It's tough for me not to think too back to that reference I made to gender. I mean, I can't speak to our opposite sex, but hypertoxic masculinity is a word that I stumbled upon in a few of the books I've read, and to me, it it means there's a fair amount to it. But I guess what I take from that is wondering again, like how I've limited my life, and if we're speaking just in terms of gender, there's a bigger part of that too when we talk about the herd.
Yeah.
What happens is we want to be we want to be part of it, but we want to be the same but a little bit better. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where that competition comes, but it's never really enough to push us to be the best we can, I don't think, because we're still looking over to make sure that everybody thinks what we're doing
Yeah.
is okay for the group. So if the group is walking around asleep, when you start sharing, at least for me, when I first started sharing like these things I was learning or things I was seeing, I'd get some strange looks, or just people would be kind
Of
of turned
course.
off.
Well, most society, especially Western society, is looking at life. They're looking for validation as who they are as a person from the outside things,
Yeah,
titles, peer group acceptance,
yeah,
accomplishments, instead of paying attention to what's in here and in their heart, and get it out into whatever it is, whatever medium they find, whether it's painting or writing or their work. How about
just
bringing
being
it,
nice to people.
consciousness to their work every day,
Yeah,
and just do the best they can from their conscience and their heart with integrity? They'd be amazed at what doors open. Instead, what we have most people is railing against what happened each week. You want to
yeah,
hear what happened to me? You want to hear what my boss did? You want to
yeah.
hear what my
There's
wife
and
did? You want to
it's
hear?
competition. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And guys will listen, and then they'll go, okay, that was tough, but wait till you hear my story.
yeah, yeah.
We want to one up them.
Totally.
All right. So thank you for your time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Fascinating, fascinating guest. I'm grateful we met.
Yeah. Me
To
too.
find like-minded people is really good on our journey, because it supports that we are doing things that are important. And every time we change, things change.
Yeah.
And in my life review, right, religion has talked about, we're going to hear, you're going to see every sin, so don't sin. Only the good I had done flashed before my eyes. And I'm embarrassed to say I was 50 and I hadn't realized how many lives I had touched, because I spent so much time in self-loathing and making myself wrong for living a life and making mistakes. which, by the way, seemed like a good idea at the time,
Yeah.
whatever I did, right? And
Hmm.
now it's very much like Siddhartha, who became Buddha. But when he
Yeah.
was young, he was told he was going to be the Buddha, and he went studying, and he was going to be the
Yeah. He
perfect
did
Buddha.
everything.
He went with sages and wise men, and then read every text he could find. And he got so exhausted, that's where he fell under the tree.
Bodhi tree. Yeah.
And he started. It occurred to him to laugh at himself that he was the Buddha the minute he embraced himself, flaws and all, and found a sense of humor about his life. And if I could encourage everybody to get to that place, have a sense of humor about yourself, let everybody that's different, don't let them go, but embrace them and ask them questions about how they came to where that conclusion, and just find it interesting, because that's the reason there's so many differences, and to do good, because somehow that's recorded on the fabric of time. We're supposed to make mistakes. It's called sin by religion, but we're supposed to. We're human. That's how we grow.
Yeah.
And to get over ourselves, right? That we're all full of shit somewhere, and it's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And
Anxiety.
the God of Spinoza is a great thing for people to read. I encourage people to read it. Baruch Spinoza later changed his name to Benedict. Fascinating, right? Just to thinking like that in the 1600s, he came here with that knowing. Very much like Marcus Aurelius, very much like
Yeah.
Cicero, very much like maybe even modern day, like Eckhart Tolle and Wayne Dyer and
Yeah.
Deepak Chopra. There's people that come with a different level of knowing. Or Gandhi and Mother Teresa, they weren't letting the machine run them at all. And listen, I didn't live with them, so I'm sure they had their moments, but they
Yeah.
were probably 70% running the machine. If
Yeah.
I can get to 50 someday, I'm happy. If I can get to 50%, and it's a journey. And the
Yeah.
reason I like to have guests is because there's no one way to do this.
I agree.
It's each person's way. And so I'm really grateful to hear your way and what you discovered and found. And I'd like to do this a couple times in a year if you'd like to. I'd
Yeah.
like to have a further
I would.
conversation
I would
about
love
it.
it. Yeah.
Okay.
Continue to learn.
Take some notes of what you're
Yeah.
learning and
Yeah.
what things that come, right? After this is over, you'll go, well, geez, I could have talked about that. I could have.
Oh
Take
yeah.
some notes, and we'll get to it. We'll get to it a little deeper.
I love it.
I'm grateful, Tom.
Me too.
All right, now make sure to stay online. I'm gonna just stay with me for a minute. I'm gonna end the recording.
Okay.
All right, everybody. You've met Tom Moore, like I met Tom Moore, and I was fascinated and grateful. And I know that if you listen to what he said, you'll come to that same conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you.